What's up, everybody? It's Daniel Omach. Welcome to the Freestyle. We have a very special guest for you today. One of my close friends from school days, college days swiftly pass, an icon. He's currently in both law school and business school, has multiple properties in multiple cities. The one and only Kareem. What's good?
Bro, yeah, I mean, that's too fond of a or too kind of an introduction, but I
It's
appreciate
all
you
facts,
having me on the
y'all.
show. I mean, I heard that the freestyle was where it's at, so I just had to pop up, bro.
Oh man, I appreciate it, man. Thanks for making the time, dude. Yeah, let's get into it, man. Today we're gonna be talking about real estate. Kareem, we've had a bunch of conversations in the past.
Yeah.
I know you have knowledge to share with everybody, so yeah, let's do it. I'd love to start with where you're from, and whether or not that kind of shaped your interest in real
Mm,
estate, or kind of your general approach.
yeah, no, for sure, it actually did. So I'm from Queens, New York, but people say they don't hear it in my accent anymore because I actually lived down south for 3 years working when I was done with undergrad. So
Gotcha.
Um, yeah, I'm from Queens, New York, and just seeing the prices of real estate in New York significantly influenced my path to real estate. Just because when you see the types of like the average price of a home in New
It's
York
crazy.
City,
It's
it's
crazy,
insane.
bro.
It's insane. Like you just think that the barrier to entry into real estate is entirely too high, and then you move to a place like Houston, Texas, Mobile, Alabama, the two places
Mhm.
that I've specifically been to, and you see how much real estate costs, and it's like the same house costs a fifth of the price like that. So very much so where I'm from influenced my interest in real estate and influenced how surprised I was by moving down south and just seeing the pricing.
Got you. And I feel like I've seen that. I mean, I feel like a lot of times studios in New York can be compared price wise to multi-bedroom houses in some of these
100%.
places in the South.
100%. You could get a studio in the city for like 300, 400K, and it's like a house in Mobile, new construction, 4 bedroom house will cost you sub 200. So it's just a jarring difference. Yeah.
It's wild because look, there are differences in cost of living, and in, I'm sure, property management and all that stuff that has to be factored in.
Facts, facts.
But I feel like that's probably, the spread, the gap is probably too much. It doesn't necessarily reflect that. It's just the demand and then supply being maybe artificially contained in places like New York. I'm not sure if that's even is that remotely accurate, or it doesn't
Yeah,
feel
no, no.
real.
Yeah. There's a bunch of factors that influence it, but the biggest thing to me, I kind of think of it as a spectrum, and it's weird to think about the United States in this way, just because the spectrum is kind of polarized on either side. But either way, so
Yeah.
if you think about West Coast, East Coast, that's where you have these markets where prices are extremely high, but you get a lot of appreciation in the property. And then when you start going into the middle of the country, for some reason, like prices come down significantly, but you don't
Mhm.
get as much appreciation. And all of that is, like more general, but you have to account for kind of rental income versus appreciation. And that's how I think about it. The coasts are more like appreciation type markets, and then the middle of the country is more so you can make a living off of the rental income.
Got it. Rental
Yeah,
income
yeah.
versus like appreciation of the overall value when you want to potentially resell.
Yeah,
That's
and if you think about it, like your background, if you think about options, stock, all that good stuff, it's like a high growth stock
mhm.
versus a dividend stock, and that it's like to the T that comparison.
That makes a ton of sense. And then you have to deal
Yeah,
with associated, variances and volatility with the respective kind of assets. So that's helpful.
facts,
Um,
facts.
so how did you get started with actually real estate investing? I think we've had moments, as young people where we hear people say, "Oh, get property, got to get some property," and it's kind
Yeah.
of like, "All right, cool. Like, how is this actually happening?" What made you want to pull the trigger, and how did you get started and decide, "Hey, I actually want to start investing in this now"?
Yeah. Part of it is being from Queens, New York, and I knew I was moving down to Houston to start working when I was done with undergrad.
Gotcha.
So I guess this is something that was a little bit more specific to me. You know this about me. I'm like very I'm very stingy, or I'm frugal. Let's call it that. I'm frugal.
Yeah, I wouldn't call you stingy, bro. I don't want to call you stingy.
Nah. But yeah, so I'm money minded. I'm fairly frugal with my money. So when I was graduating, I actually had like a good little like chunk of change. I had like a nice lump sum of cash, and I
Yeah,
was like, I'm going down south. I don't really want to rent. Is there any way that I can buy? And it was very realistic once I actually like looked at the numbers. So yeah, that's really how I got started. I bought my first property for me when I was
I was
22. And that's one of the big pieces. Like when people ask me about real estate and all that stuff, that's one of my recommendations, is to buy something for yourself first, just because you grow up in your parents' home, you don't really like see all the stuff that goes on because you don't care. Like it's not
you're
your
just
house,
a
really.
kid. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. You're just
facts.
living. But different people are coming into the crib to fix things at different times, and you're just like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Exactly. I remember I was talking with my moms, and I was like, yo, we've been in this house since 2001. And that's actually where I am right now. I'm living my parents' pandemic life.
Yeah, man.
We've been in
Love
this
it.
house since 2001. Have we ever gotten that AC changed out? I just had to change out an AC in one of my spots in Houston. She's like, Kareem, yes. I mean, of course, it's been 20 years. What are you talking about? I was like, oh, okay. So that's just a testament to it. You never really notice that type of thing
Yeah.
when you're a kid living in your parents' house versus when you own a spot and you have to take care of it yourself. So I always recommend, buy your first spot for you, live in that spot, and you can kind of see how pricing works, how you have to interface with contractors, these little like nuanced type of things that you'd never get an experience with when you're a kid.
Sure. And you're not even saying necessarily, buy that first place to make this big profit. You're saying like get the feel for the experience of all the different elements at play, whether it's paying people to sort of fix a property or understanding, different kinds of loans you can get and things of that nature.
Yeah. Yep. 100%. Exactly.
Got it. Got it. That's helpful. And now, as I understand it, you have multiple properties, right? So
Yeah.
what was your path to, after getting that first property, deciding I can get another one? I can
Yeah.
I don't speak with many people in our age bracket generally who have multiple properties. And I'm really curious as to what motivated you to go that route.
Yeah, bro. In short, serendipity. Because I was moving from Houston to Mobile, like with my job, and I had the spot in Houston. And to be clear, too, I was moving to Mobile like 8 months after I had moved down to Houston. So I just bought this spot. I was living there for like 8 months, and now I have to move again. So there's two options: you could sell the spot, or you could rent it out and kind of like hold on to it. So like, okay, let me try to rent it out. Let's see how that goes.
Yeah.
And then just seeing the bread, honestly, just like, oh
In the
wow, this
bread.
works. this this works very, very well. And once I saw that, I was like, oh, I should kind of keep on doing this in the same area. And that's one of the pieces of advice that I've gotten kind of like in talking to folks who do this type of thing. Like once you find your niche, wash, rinse, repeat. Just like keep on
If it
hammering
works,
it,
if it ain't broke,
scale it.
definitely don't fix it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that was really it. Just by chance, I moved to Mobile, so I had this other spot. It was the decision between selling it or renting it out. I rented it out. It worked really well. I was like, you know what? Let me kind of keep on doing this. So I just bought two more in the same area.
That's awesome. And sorry, that was in Houston initially or in Mobile?
So in Houston.
In
So
Houston.
the
Got you.
first spot was in Houston. When I went to Mobile, I bought a spot as well, and I was living there. We can talk about house hacking in a little bit, if you want to jump into that topic as well, because that's what I did in Mobile, and easily was like the most profitable thing that I've done in terms of real estate. So maybe that's an exciting topic as well. But yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Oh no, absolutely. I definitely want to talk about house hacking. I guess before we even get into that, I feel like people might have the question, right? Like you're pretty young. You mentioned having like a good lump sum of bread
hmm
that you could take advantage of and use to buy property. How much, generally, how much money do people need to have to start
yeah,
considering buying real estate? And I know that's going to vary based on market, but
yep.
how much money should people think about having saved up to think about it?
Yeah, bro. So many people think like there's absolutely no way, if I'm looking at something that's $300,000, like how in the world can I, it just doesn't, that's a big number.
It doesn't add up. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I might as well just rent. But
Exactly.
I guess one thing or two things, I'll say two things. So you need to look into the types of loans that are available for real estate. So one that people aren't as familiar with is called the FHA loan. I can't even remember what the
It's like
acronym
a
stands
first
for.
time home buyers thing. You told me about it actually.
Yes. But the thing about FHAs is that you don't actually only have to use it for your first home. If I'm not mistaken, you can continually use it. It's just there's like a timeliness associated with it. I want to say it's on the order of 2 years where you have to live in that first spot for 2 years and then move to another spot. So there's a lot of people, and this is getting kind of like farther down the line, but there's a lot of people that'll buy a spot, live in it so they get that lower interest rate for 2 years, then rent it out after that point, move to another spot and keep on doing that and keep on like cascading it. And the whole point is that you get a lower interest rate when you do an FHA. But more specifically, when you have an FHA loan, there's two very important things. One, you get a very favorable interest rate because it's kind of like your primary residence. Two, you can put down 3.5% of the home's value, and that's all you need for your down payment. So if you think about a $200,000 property, let's do math on the fly. So what is that? $7,000, right? So that's $7,000. 3.5% of $200,000 is going to be $7,000. So that's your first piece.
By the way, that's good.
I'm an engineer. But,
let them know.
So $7,000 is how much you'll need for your down payment. But the second piece that you should also be familiar with is something called closing costs. So when you have an underwriter, when you have the title company that goes through the whole process of checking on the title and making sure the chain of title is coherent, and then doing all like the nitty gritty details that you don't really see, but it's done on the back end. Usually closing costs will be between 3 and 5% of the home's value. So yeah,
so add that on top. That's like 6.5% that you have to think about.
6.5 to 8.5%. Exactly.
Still,
so
not that much in the grand scheme of things.
So bro, when and if you want to add a little contingency in there just to make sure that you have bread just in case, call it 10%. So 10% of the property's value is about how much you would want. So that's kind of realistic when you think about the South. Again, that house in Mobile, when I bought it, it was on the order of 200. It was actually less than 200. So if you think about just a nice even number, 200, you want to have about 20K saved up, which, for some people is going to be kind of like a difficult number to get to, but there is a money mindedness associated with it that you can reach that number. Like in many stages of life, you can reach that number. It takes some time, but yeah, I think that it's like a super realistic goal in many cases.
Got it. So if you're looking at like, let's say somebody finds a market that's lower and they're looking at a $100,000 property, you're saying today, right? They should think about having $10,000 saved up, right? Cover that FHA loan interest rate, and then cover or rather the percentage down that you need to have, and then cover the potential closing costs and anything else additional or auxiliary. Okay, that's really helpful. And those properties exist too, right? Like there are properties that are like 100K somewhere. They might not be the biggest, the nicest.
As a matter of fact, brother, that stuff that I have in Houston, every piece of it is sub 100. So
wow.
Yeah. So that's when the game starts getting real interesting, when you start looking at suburbs of Houston, and more specifically, like the places are in the suburbs of Houston. It's going to be tough to find in Houston proper stuff that's that cheap. But when you're talking about like suburbs of major metropolitan areas, you can get property for like very, very reasonable relative. Prime example, a good friend of mine just bought a spot in like a suburb of Boston. And yeah, purchase price was around 160, 180, something around that neighborhood. And when you think Boston, you're like, there's no way. But if you start looking at the suburbs, and you can start getting like the effects of appreciation because you're so close to a metropolitan area. So yeah, it's dope. So that's always been my recommendation. Like look towards the suburbs of major metropolitan areas, and so you could kind of catch on to a little bit of the appreciation, but you'd also get the cost effectiveness of living in the burbs.
That's awesome. And that's really helpful. And I'm sure some people are thinking, right? Okay, let's say I put that $20,000 down for a 200K property. what does the rest of my payment period look like? Like mortgages, at least for me, as a concept in my head, that's a big commitment. You know, they make them like 30 years. So it's like, all right, you have to have the capacity to pay that mortgage for 30 years. And I think of everything in rent terms because it's what I'm, first familiar with. So I think about it
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
imagine no matter what, being
yep,
locked in to pay rent for 10 to 30 years.
yeah,
I
yeah,
guess, how do you think about that in a way that makes you comfortable, or how do you plan for it?
yeah. So it's interesting. So when you're thinking about like a primary residence,
Yeah.
typically your interest rate is going to be lower than that which you get for a rental property.
Right.
Um, yeah, just like the lender will give you a lower interest rate. So and just thinking macro scale, like the interest rates are at an all-time low or like at a historic low right now. So if there was, oftentimes people say like if there was a time to buy, it would be right now because of those lower interest rates. So if you think about a primary residence, you can get something, in the neighborhood of 3-4% on your loan.
Mhm.
So oftentimes, depending on where you are, and not I'd even like not even have to caveat that oftentimes you can get mortgages like where your monthly payment is cheaper than what you would have to pay for rent. So, I guess thinking about it macro scale, one
Yeah.
thing you have to think about cash flow, right? Like if you're paying less in your mortgage and that a portion of that mortgage in addition to that is going towards you, right? Like it's going towards the principal. So you're building equity in this house. It just starts to become cost competitive. So yeah, I'd say that think about it in terms of cash flow and also account for the fact that some of that bread that you're spending is not just going to interest, it's going towards equity in you, building your net worth, all that good stuff. So in many cases, it does make sense to buy. But in a place like New York, again, your rent is going to be less than what you're going to pay for the mortgage. So it's
Yeah,
tough. It's tough.
yeah. Well, but that leads me to my next point, man. It's a really, really helpful breakdown, Kareem, of like the fact that you're not only paying back on the interest rate, you are also paying yourself because you're building that equity in the property. That's super helpful to break it down that way. On the New York piece, right? Like, I'm curious to hear, even philosophically, what are your thoughts about renting? Because, me and my girlfriend Taylor, we started thinking about what is that going to look like? Are we going to buy a property? We want to live in New York, probably, maybe
Yeah.
LA or something. But like, are we going to buy a property? Can we just rent forever? Is that bad? All we hear is own property, own property, own property. Like, I'm curious
Yeah.
to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, the rhetoric around it is way too strong. Like there is absolutely no problem with renting indefinitely, especially when you're tied to a specific region in the country. For example, like a major metropolitan area. If you're thinking about like a New York or San Fran or like something where the barrier to entry to buying real estate is actually that high, then and you're
You
kind
gotta
of
be
like
famous.
absolved to
You gotta
that.
be famous. And Taylor's on the way. So, you know what I'm saying? If she keeps going, we good. We gonna get a house. But, what I'm saying? In the absence of that, though,
So 100%, bro. Like if you want to live in the heart of the city, renting for your life is actually not that bad of a thing, like by any means, because like that down payment that you would have put towards a house, you can put that towards investments. You can like, and you can put them towards investments that are more liquid. You can put it in an ETF or you can put it into stock. Like there's so many options out there. So it's overall, my
Mhm.
philosophy on renting is it's perfectly fine in some situations. But what I will say is if you can find a way in your lifestyle to go to a place that kind of like or go to a place that's not as desirable, like let's say a suburb of Houston or even in New York, a suburb of New York. If you can go a
Yep.
little bit higher up, like a little bit higher, like upstate, Yonkers type area, there's there it's a lot more reasonable to buy,
Yeah.
and you still have access to the major metropolitan area to go to work or what have you, whatever you have going on in New York. It's just a lifestyle kind of balance right there.
Yeah, it's interesting how work has been it's been a component of value,
Facts.
right? Like proximity to areas where people work. And that's
Yeah.
getting turned on its head because of COVID and because of quarantining and working from home. And
Ooh.
everyone's saying, at least on LinkedIn, I see a lot of polls that moving forward, it's going to be different. There's going to be a hybrid model. There are going to be people that can work from home all the time. And I really wonder, maybe we can't figure it out on this chat, but I really wonder
Yeah.
how that's going to affect like property values, because if people can work from anywhere, whoa, now if you're in one of these places where the only downside was like, oh, I got a 3 hour commute into work or whatever, that's not a downside anymore. So that's very interesting to think about.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And to your point, like people always say that the first three rules of real estate are location, location, and location. so, so when you start thinking like completely flips the script completely. So I'm excited to see, like it's been a terrible time. It's been a time of a lot of loss.
Yeah.
But kind of looking forward, I'm very interested in seeing what the next 3 to 5 years brings in terms of property values, specifically in those suburban areas, because they just they just become a lot more desirable. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, 100%, 100%. And I want to make sure I don't skip over this. You mentioned house hacking, and I did want to chat
Oh,
about that
fast.
because, like, there are different strategies I've heard. To try starting out with real estate. You can try the live-in flip, just like you said, where the first property is kind of where you live, and you try to build up
Facts.
the value of it and flip it. House hacking, my understanding is like you go into a multifamily, you're living in one of the units, you rent out the other ones.
Yep.
Um,
Perfect.
I mean, I'd love to hear like, do you recommend one more than the other, or sorry, do you recommend one over kind of other strategies, and like, what's been your experience with house hacking?
Yeah. So the only two things that I've ever done, um, and more specifically, like in my case too, I've done turnkey for everything that I've done in Houston. Turnkey just means there's no renovation involved. So I bought properties that were ready to be rented out. As soon as I copped, find tenants, get them in there.
That's good.
Yeah, exactly. Start trying to like build up cash flow as quickly as possible. In
Awesome.
Mobile, I did do house hacking, and again, to reiterate, easily the
Really?
the best investment that I made in my life to this point. Like easily. Like there's actually just no comparison. So house hacking is cool because you get the effect of that lower interest rate. So your mortgage is not as high as it would have been, or it could be.
Because you're living in it?
Because correct, because it's a
You're
primary
primary
residence.
residence?
Facts, exactly. And then on top of that, in my place in Mobile, it doesn't have to be a multi-unit. It depends on kind of where you are in your lifestyle. So for me, I'm single. Bro, if I'm
Hey,
being honest, if I'm being honest, that's half the reason I'm on the freestyle right now. Who knows? I could find Bay. That I got a haircut yesterday. Yeah.
hey, man, he came looking clean. Give him a chance. The lighting's good. We know why you're here. I'm playing. Keep going.
But no, yeah, I'm joking. So, it doesn't necessarily have to be a multi-unit. It depends on where you are in your life. So for me, I bought a 4-bedroom house. I was living in the master suite of that house. I had 2 other bedrooms that were like livable. The third one, it was more of an office, type of spot. But either way, I only rented out the 2 other bedrooms that were like very nice. So rented out the 2 bedrooms. I was pulling in cash from either one of those people that I was living with. And to be clear too, these are like people in Mobile that are around my age, working professionals. They're just looking for a cheap spot. And in Mobile, you could charge like 500-600 for a room, and people will happily take you up on that offer, especially in a house. Like it was also a very nice house.
It's a
So
nice house.
yeah, so I'm living in the master suite, renting it out, almost covering my mortgage with that bread that's coming in. And if you
Wow.
account for the amount of equity that I'm putting into myself, then I was covering my mortgage and then some. So I was kind of like paying myself to live, which was insane. So,
That's the dream.
bro, and then if you think about again like dividend versus growth stock, cool. So I'm like pulling in a dividend every month that's paying me on top of what like literally I'm making money to live right now. Cool. So that's recurring over the course of 2 years.
Yeah.
Then at the end of it, Mobile had a little bit of appreciation too. So when I sold the crib, and I knew that I was going to sell the crib, so I didn't like hang up a bunch of stuff on the walls. I kept it pretty bare bones.
Yes.
Yeah, because that cuts down on your cost of what you have to do before you put the house on the market. So I
So
got the house on the market.
you sold that crib.
I did. So
Wow.
then on the back end of it, 2 years later, I sell the crib. I sell it for more than I bought it for. And I made a little profit there. So dividend, growth, everything just like lined up perfectly. So yeah, easily the best investment I've ever made. I'm a big fan of house hacking. When I'm done with school, you mentioned business and law school. When I'm done in 4 solid years, so it's a long road ahead. I look forward
It'll
to going
sneak
back
up
to
on
these,
you, man. It'll sneak up on you.
bro. Yeah. Well, I I wish it would sneak up a little faster. but
Fair.
but yeah, I'm looking forward to going back down to Houston. Hopefully Houston and or another place in the South, whatever kind of like life puts in front of me,
Yeah,
and hopefully buying a multi-unit doing the same type of thing.
got it. That's awesome. That's all. And would you live in Houston when you do that, or not necessarily?
I would. Again, just me personally, I love Houston. Like I tell people
Drake
all the
loves
time.
Houston too. You and Drake love Houston. I wonder why, man. No, but
Let's
that's
not talk
good.
about it. Let's
That's good, man. No, I've heard great things about H Town. I still haven't even been, so I got to go. It's on my list. Um,
yeah, yeah,
that's awesome, man. I guess so. You've had a bunch of experience, also being a landlord, right? Um,
yeah,
Me, I've always been a renter. Even the word landlord, I don't like. They need to change that word. It's like I
yeah,
gotta treat this
yeah,
person like a lord. What's going on? But
yeah.
I'm sure it has some
Something.
historical context. But yeah, I'm curious. What's been your experience, kind of being a landlord? What are some things that you've learned?
Yeah. So to your point, the rhetoric around being a landlord, people think like they're just this evil person that's trying to kill them and make money off of them, and it's just they're
Legit.
I'm the renter. I'm just a check. I'm just a check to them, you know.
Yeah.
So I try to break down that as much as humanly possible, and I
Yeah.
like take care of my tenants. Like when they need something taken care of, cool. For example, prime example, a tenant that I had in Houston. Houston just went through that freeze, that
Yep.
historic freeze.
Yep.
So water, like the pipes froze up. So water is not going to the unit. Tenant hits me like, hey, like, what is there any way that you can help me out? Like what can we do?
Yep.
So what did I do? Like I got him a room in a hotel for a night, and yeah,
Wow.
took just so, and they had a backup generator and they had their water running. I called the hotel to make sure that the water was running, and yeah, so like there's ways to play this where in real estate generally too is more for a relationship game than it is like a numbers game. Though you have to make sure the numbers line up, like that's first and foremost. It is also a relationship game, so you have to build a rapport with the tenants. You like it. Yeah, treat people the way that you would like to be treated is kind of like the long and short of it. So yeah, I have had some nightmarish experiences, but I have had positive experiences as well. I'll talk about the nightmarish stuff. The biggest thing that has happened,
Yeah.
that one of the units that I had was like torn up by actually the first tenant that I've ever had, torn up. So that's
First tenant. Oh man.
bro. I mean, and you'd think like, oh, okay, it's about time to get out of the game, like if that's what it's gonna be. But I kept at it. I ended up renovating that spot, got the sweetest tenant ever in that same spot
Awesome.
after the renovation. So one thing is that when you have a nice spot, nice people tend to gravitate towards it. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Um, and yeah, there's certain things that pop up as a result of just being like an AC. I had to change out an AC, and that's one of the most expensive things that you have to do. But thankfully, I won't have to do that again. Hopefully, in the next 20 years, So,
Yeah.
yeah, there are some nightmarish things that happen, but overall, as long as you kind of take care of the tenants, like you would, take care of your own people, like it usually works out, bro. Like they're people. I mean, you're a person, just treat
Yeah.
everyone that way instead of treating them like it's a business and like it's just a check coming in.
Really love that. I love what you said about just, well, obviously treating people how you like to be treated. It sounds simple in nature, but a lot of folks, because it is an investment as well, people maybe don't
Yeah.
always remember that human element. And you touched on something else. You said, real estate, of course, it is about money and the financials as well, but it's also about relationships and how you treat
Mhm.
people, because
Facts.
your reputation continues. There's increasing transparency around landlords, around a renter's experience, and all that stuff. And so, in order for that cash flow to continue, you need that. So that's really awesome. And yeah, I hope that any future landlords that I or anyone watching this has is like you. So that, that's very cool, man. Very cool. Cool. Look, I do want to wrap up, but I think one kind of final question I'd love to ask you is there anything that you would sort of do differently? Now that you've had an experience with a few properties, if you were to do
Yeah.
it again, what are some things that maybe you would have done differently?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, two things. So I have three spots. So that first one I originally lived in, That's the one that ended up getting trashed. I ended up renovating it. I'll say one story about that one.
Yeah.
Second one, taught me the value of patience, bro, which is huge when it comes to real estate. So I was working like objectively like a very good job. I was getting paid like pretty well. So
Yes,
I was
sir.
like building I was doing this thing where I would like build up enough bread, buy property, build up enough bread, buy property. And I kept on doing that cycle because again, I'm fairly frugal. I was able to save up relatively quickly because I lived well beneath my means.
Nice.
So that second spot, like I was sitting on some bread. I was like, okay, I'm about ready to kind of make another play. Let me look for something. No deals are popping up. I'm like, man, like I would love to like get in on a deal right now. Like this is great. So a deal pops up and I just jump in on it. I don't do as much due diligence as I should have. Like I don't go through the same metrics that I normally would have gone through. I'm just like, yeah, this looks right. The numbers seem like they're in the right neighborhood. But all things considered, I probably wouldn't have gotten that second one. So I guess the big takeaway is one, like be very patient, and two, like be patient because deals are going to pop up. Like you just have to kind of like
There are always more deals. Yeah.
exactly. And then two, do your due diligence. Like there's no excuse for like not running through the right metrics, and you should check through a good bit of things. You should check it. You should check for your cap rate. You should check for your return on investment. You should check for how long vacancies last in that specific neighborhood. You should check for like these types of things. You check for the school district that it's at, the crime in the area, all these types of things, like just the nuanced things that come with any kind of like real estate investment. And then the second one is about that first piece of property, the one that, I was living in and I rented it out. I had to get the renovation done because it got trashed.
Yeah.
Is align. So I say this hesitantly, but align your methodology with the area that you're in. So again, these spots are like not incredible by any means. And I did a pretty large scale renovation on that place. So if I had to do it again, I may have not gone all in because of course that is extremely expensive when you go all in and do an extensive renovation like that. But I say that hesitantly because as a result of that renovation, again, I got like a very, very nice tenant. So that you can't put a price on like a good tenant. So it worked out in some respects and it didn't in others. But yeah, I guess those are the two things, bro, is just make sure you or three things. Have patience, make sure you do your due diligence, and align your methodology to the area that you're dealing with. If you're in a really high class area, you're going to have to make sure the thing is decked out. If you're in a really low class area, you'll want to focus on your numbers a little bit more. Like people don't care as much, typically. And if you're somewhere in the middle, kind of like what I'm dealing with, you got to manage those
Find
things
that
and not
balance.
go too
Yeah.
Exactly.
Kareem, those are incredible tips. I think, for anyone watching this, I think there's definitely a ton that they took away. Kareem, that's perfect. Thanks for coming on the channel, man. Appreciate you coming on the freestyle.
Yeah, bro. I mean, thank you for having me. Always a pleasure chatting with you, Dio. I hope that you and Taylor are doing well. And yeah, if any other questions pop up, for sure, just shoot me a note, reach out.
Yeah.
I'm happy to kind of give my thoughts on it.
I will definitely be hitting your line. You're the real estate guru, my guy. Enjoy the rest of the weekend, brother. Appreciate it.
All right. Same to you, bro.
Peace.